make out of this thing. I got a couple of suggestions about it. One was to make like a pedestal, which I thought was kind of cool. That may be the front. That may be the back. It actually stands on its own, and it's just so beautiful. And I would sand this all smooth. You can see where it's joined here. It doesn't show up because it did sand it, but I don't want to take that much off of here. It'll just kill the sandpaper over there on the drum sander, so I'll just sand it down and, by hand and make it irregular. But I think that might be a really cool idea. I don't know if it's going to put it up on a pedestal. I don't even need to do that because it's just cool on its own. And how it will look when it's stained, I'll get some naphtha on that and show you. After I had all the edges sanded down and they were very smooth, I really liked the way they feel. Even in the little nooks and crannies, that sanding mop really gets in there nicely, so good tool to buy if you're sanding bark inclusions and little areas where you can't get in easily with a sandpaper. And doing it by hand would be very, very labor intensive. So now what I'm doing is I'm going over to the drum sander. Since I know this piece is parallel top and bottom, I'm putting 60 grit sandpaper on this jet. It's a 3216 open on the end, so you can do a 32-inch wide board or object. And I'm putting the sandpaper on now. It's a tad tricky because you got to clasp it at the end. Best to do this with it unplugged, but you can see how I can attach it there. Anyway, once this is all in place, I'll be sanding repetitively the piece, that cherry burl, that I'm using to make a pedestal out of. at one point I had cut the side, a big chunk of burl, you can see the line there, off of this main piece. And when I glued it back together, it just didn't come together very well, and I don't remember how. It's been a while since I sliced these into cookies or whatever you want to call them. Anyway, I wanted to even that off, so I was lowering that area. And since it was such a big chunk and this wood is so hard, I decided to whack it off with a chisel instead of trying to sand it, which would have taken a long time, even with something like 40 grit. I probably could have been more aggressive with like a grinder or something like that, but I didn't want to tear up this piece too much, so I just chiseled this kind of at a, so it wasn't such an aggressive separation. Okay, I don't have any naphtha. What I've got is just a rag with water, and that'll kind of give you an idea how beautiful this will look. This is a cherry burl. It's going to be even more beautiful than that. So that's one side. That's the other side. Very beautiful. Lots of figurine grain in here. Okay. So I needed to sand out those bandsaw marks, the lines that are throughout, and I was using this fine tool. It's an oscillating tool. It was one of the first oscillating tools that came out, and I bought it years ago, but it's just really not aggressive enough. So, but I tried, and I'll try a number of different tools to see which best suits. You don't want to take too long. Even with a 60 grit sandpaper on this tool, it just wasn't enough to. Again, this cherry burl is hard as a rock, so I just decided to go with an 80 grit, but on an oscillating tool instead. So I also dug out some of the loose bark, and it was pretty dusty, so I got rid of that. And then I did a 220 sandpaper on the top and the bottom. I was happy with the sides, and I just smoothed out some of the edges and went back to the sanding mop from time to time. And I've vacillated between these three processes to just get as much smooth as I possibly could. But this hand sanding is very labor intensive on the hands, and I try to avoid that, which is why I like the sanding mop so much better. It seems to really do the trick and get what you need. But for the flat areas, the 220 flat sandpaper, and then I went to a 600, worked really well. Here I'm just dusting out the cracks and crevices and pulling away some more loose material. You can see it falling out there. And once that's done, I move on to a final sand and then urethane. These are nitrile gloves. Supposed to be good. There's all different kinds of gloves in the market. These are good ones. So I'll put it over my watch, protect my watch if I can. It's a clearwood finish, semi-gloss, no yellowing. So I thought using a foam brush would give me a nice even surface with this brushing lacquer, and it did, but this brushing lacquer was really amazing, and I used a brush to get into all the nooks and crannies at the edges, but I really didn't need to use a foam because it laid so flat and so smooth I barely needed to sand in between coats. And they recommend you don't, but I did anyway, just out of habit. So after I sanded and then wiped down the sawdust, I did a second coat, and this time I got into the little cracks and crevices because I wanted to make sure that they were all nicely sealed off too. And I just used the brush because there's no way I could have gotten in there with a foam roller. I didn't even need to use a foam roller like I said earlier, so I just used this chip brush. Now there's all kinds of chip brushes. Some are nicer than others. Some lose their hair more readily than others. This is a better chip brush, so I didn't have as much hair loss as I did using other stuff. So this was a good one. I did have some hair loss, and I picked those things out. Pay attention to that if you're going to use these brushes. But they're disposable, which is cool, because cleaning the brushes, that is like a nightmare in my opinion, and it's a whole nother step and process, which it's just nasty. So I like to use a brush that I can pitch. I don't mind picking out the hairs. You just pay attention to it and go for it. So this particular finish says I don't need to put sand in between, and really, this is so smooth. This is really nice stuff. It's Daft Clearwood finish. It is a brushing lacquer. It is really nice stuff. I think I'm gonna continue to use this stuff. No yellowing. It's just beautiful, and it is a beautiful finish. Good stuff. Okay, the wood is nice to start with, but anyway, it's really beautiful. So this is finished, basically. I'm just going to sand. I'm going to sand with 220, and then I'm going to wipe it off and sand with this. This is 600. It has been used. This hasn't, and this is a little less. So I'm going to see how this, even though it's been used, it might be more like an 800 now or 1,000 because it's been used. I can feel a difference in the two. We'll see how it looks, and I mean, it's really a nice finish as it is. So I'm just gonna sand this down, and I'll be back with you. I don't need to sand this area, but it's this thing did a really nice job of smoothing this off, and I didn't get a lot of tooth with this particular lacquer, so I don't need to sand those areas at all. They're really nice and smooth. Just the top and the bottom, or the bottom and the top. You know, this thing can be used in a number of different ways. Wow, so smooth. A little bubble from the drip. Now I'm going to put some of this feed and wax on, which is pretty amazing stuff. So I want to avoid getting it in the cracks, because getting it out of there isn't so easy. Although there's areas in there that are kind of dusty. I'll clean that out with a brush after this dries. I'm thinking because this is bigger, it'll be the bottom. This is the top. Just look at this beautiful wood grain. I am so happy and impressed by not just the finish of the brushing lacquer, but this feed and wax that is the final coat. This is just a beautiful piece. I could just sit it on the side like a sofa table for a display, or actually use it as a riser or a something to raise something up. I'll show you a picture of that in the end. But it's very versatile. It's just such a beautiful piece of wood for those who love wood grain and detail and texture and character that's in wood. That is gorgeous. Absolutely beautiful. So this is it. Is this beautiful or what? Wow, it's just absolutely gorgeous, and it's really, really smooth. Very much like this piece. So it'll probably sit like this for a pedestal to raise something up, and then when not being used, it can be stood up like this. It's gorgeous no matter what. The burl in here is beautiful, and the character and qualities that happen internally in the burl is also beautiful. This is the pith. This tree has been down. This burl has been cut off for years and years, so no risk of it splitting from here. Any cracks and splits that could have occurred, and I have chosen to leave those in. Like here's one, that's the pith. And but this has got a bark inclusion in it, so not a big deal. Possibly this, but it's stable, so no worries. Looks great. I love it.